I have something small, a small clip I want to show y'all. Well, not show y'all, but for y'all to listen to, rather. Excuse me. I don't have the capabilities to screen share yet, but the least I can do is bring you this. This is a psychological and behavioral analysis of Brian Kohburger. Excuse me. Shout out to I Don't Belong Here with Samantha Benango. With that being said, let's get into the subject matter.
How can anybody act like that after just killing?
What they've done.
Yeah, and you know that, the conspiracy theory people out there go, see, because he didn't do it, he's just, he's just walking around because he didn't do it. He's acting natural. I mean, it's pretty shocking.
Yes, he just consigned himself to a lifetime in prison for no reason.
Right, with no chance to appeal, because that's what everybody does when they're innocent.
The intention of justice is to see that the guilty people are proven guilty and that the innocent are free. Only we have a problem here.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is the I Don't Belong Here show, and I am your host, Samantha Benigno. I am a behavioral scientist, a career psychotherapist, a sixth-year PhD candidate in clinical psychology, a master's level psychologist and counselor. And today we are talking about the psychology of Brian Kohburger.
Never sue the other driver after a car accident. There's a better way to get paid a way bigger check without having to go.
Psychology of Brian Kohburger. Now, if you've been following me for any length of time, you know that I've been reluctant to touch this case. And that is not by accident. And though I've had some gut reactions along the way, I wanted to be really certain that I do my homework to find out who this guy is before I go on the record and speak about him. And now, after going on an extensive deep dive into this man, his life, his friends, his family, the whole thing, I am now very certain Brian Kohburger is not your average serial killer, psychopath type. But it does have to do with mental health. And actually, the vast majority of the clients that I work with today look an awful lot like Brian Kohburger on paper. However, there's one big caveat to this discussion that I want to make 100% crystal clear. None of the diagnoses that we are discussing today, in any way, shape, or form, have anything to do with violence or violent tendencies inherently. This is what makes Brian Kohburger distinctly different. I also want to make it completely crystal clear that I am in no way saying that Brian Kohburger is not responsible for his behavior. In no way am I suggesting that a mental health diagnosis somehow means that he should not be responsible for his behavior. In fact, what makes Brian Kohburger unique and very interesting is that he made an intellectual choice to commit these murders, but was not compelled the way that a Ted Bundy or Jeffrey Dahmer was or would be to commit murder. Okay, now, neurotypical is just the word that we use to describe what most people's brains operate like. Neurodivergence is simply a way to say different than the norm, a brain that is structured differently than the norm, and that is very much what we understand autism to be today. That's why any discussion about acquiring autism from Tylenol is just patently absurd, regardless of your political beliefs or affiliations. And neurodivergence is something that the vast majority of the world clearly does not understand.
Well, it looks like Kohburger, he enters the entrance to a Costco. I mean, isn't that like one of the most obvious things in the world? Who doesn't know that when you go to Costco, you need the card?
It's not very reassuring. So today we are going to discuss what to make of his behavior. We're going to address questions like that of Mr. Hughes here from the Moscow Police Department, and hopefully help you to understand not only these odd behaviors that whoever has known him points out, but how all of that may have resulted in murder. So Ryan Kohburger has an official diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, and OCD. And as someone whose practice is primarily working with neurodivergent clients, I can tell you that this combination of diagnostic symptoms, autism spectrum, ADHD, and OCD or other anxiety disorders, are common. They almost always occur together at varying degrees of difficulty or severity to the client. And these diagnoses, though, are helpful when one psychological provider is trying to communicate with another. And it's important to understand that if you do not have the correct diagnoses, then you will likely not have the right treatment plan.
Yep.
And I will tell you right up front that in this case, I suspect had he been given the right treatment at the right time, this violent act could and would have been circumvented. That's because the vast majority of adult providers have little to absolutely no experience that they are aware of with neurodivergence. And that's because most clinical professionals who work with adults are told that this is a diagnosis that is assigned in childhood. So nobody knows what it looks like when it isn't diagnosed and it shows up in front of them in a clinical setting. Oh my gosh. What it looks like when it isn't diagnosed and it shows up in front of them in a clinical setting. A scenario that occurs all the time and is very frustrating to those of us who have watched our clients and their families suffer because of this, because of a fundamental lack of understanding of this diagnosis, what it is, how it shows up in adults, and what
So
it
in other words,
means.
it's people being idiots.
This is a systems problem, a black mark in the field that you only find out about if you are one of the ones who happen to stumble upon it with very frustrated, and rightfully so, patients and their families that have fallen between the cracks. And so how does it show up? It shows up as a laundry list of other diagnoses, some of which are competing, that have been assigned by a lifetime of providers that really just don't know what the symptoms of neurodivergence are.
Mm-hmm.
And in part, that's because our understanding of autism has grown exponentially over the last decade. So autism is a spectrum disorder, which means that it covers a wide array of symptoms at all different levels of difficulties to the client. And the reason why it is now believed to be far more common than in the past is simply because in the past, our understanding of what it meant was far more limited, the symptoms that had been assigned to an autism diagnosis were limited to those on the farthest end of the spectrum. And now we accept that that was an incorrect understanding. And something that most people don't know, because we think of our science as so evolved, and it has come so far and so fast, but it is only really in the last 10, maybe 15 years where technology, advancements in artificial intelligence, and the more widespread availability of computer technology, fMRI machines, that have allowed for our understanding of the brain, and particularly the brain and behavior, to have expedited. But it's a newer understanding, a new science. And so a lot of the old ideas are based solely on behavior and a very primitive understanding of the brain, which was primarily made up of guesswork. Okay, one of the major symptoms that is critical in the diagnosis is odd social behavior, the inability to read social cues correctly. So this might mean standing too close, invading personal space, standing too far away, speaking at a volume that seems...
Okay, so in other words, you're saying that an awkward person could be autistic, is what you're saying.
Appropriate to the situation, not making very good eye contact, not knowing how to end or wrap up a conversation. It might seem to you like they're holding you hostage because of that. There may be an affect that doesn't match the situation. So in other words, maybe it's a very happy moment, but the person doesn't seem like they're smiling, or they don't seem to be making any expression in particular at all. Or you might see a very hollow affect. In other words, they're smiling, but you don't feel happiness, or you can tell there's a mismatch between whatever the expression seems to be and whatever's going on in that moment. Like there's an intellectual awareness that I'm supposed to be smiling right now, but you don't experience happiness from that person. So it's very hard for you to pick up on whatever they're throwing down, right? It's hard for us neurotypical folks to know what to make of someone who's expressionless. Things that may just seem totally normal, like, for example, knowing that you need to show a card when you walk into Costco, may not be so obvious to somebody who's neurodivergent. And it is very common that while there might be social challenges, or what we might say skills deficits in this very specific area of development, which is directly related to your emotion system, and which we're going to spend a lot of time talking about in just a moment, it is also critically important to understand that one's logical thinking or critical thinking systems, or other systems within the brain, will often overcompensate for where there are emotion deficits. And when we look deeply into Brian Kohburger's history, we see exactly that. We see that he has the ability to use logical inferences, to use deductive reasoning. He has all of the skills intellectually to make valid arguments, to put information together in such a way that made him a successful academic, or at least a hopeful successful academic in the future.
Yep.
And this is the same skill set that allows for folks who are neurodivergent to engage in what is called masking, or the ability to hide their symptoms by mimicking what neurotypical people are doing and saying. And it's because they don't understand the behaviors that they are engaging in. They don't understand why they need to behave the way that they are. It's hollow that their behavior comes off as odd, unusual, strange, or bizarre.
Don't buy an e-bike until you see this. Almost no one knows this, but Mercedes has just entered the e-bike market.
Behavior comes off as odd, unusual, strange, or bizarre.
Front door of his office that says hello has the smiley face and exclamation point. Can be a way to try to superficially, in a very shallow way, seem friendly and inviting. To try to basically create a mask or an image for how he wants people to see him.
And when we go back and we look at the social history of Brian Kohburger, we know that there is a long history of being teased, of being considered an outcast or a social reject. We know that he had friends in high school, but that he resented them because he felt like they were the rejects. He wanted to be, well received. He wanted to be popular. He wanted to be like everybody else. He wanted to fit in. And what we see with this population over and over and over again, what we see with neurodivergence is exactly this. A long history of being considered different, being picked on mercilessly by other children, being considered an outcast, however, really not wanting to be an outcast, wanting to fit in, wanting what other people seem to be able to have very easily. And this then, of course, leads to trauma, social trauma. And that can have any number of potential outcomes, any that you can conceive, but the core of it is the same, which is feeling a lack of sense of safety in the world. It also appears that because he was overweight, and the addiction ultimately led to him turning his life over to health, that the reason for that, the motivation for that was to fit in, because he thought that if he looked better, that if he was fit, in shape, good looking, that would change how people perceived him. And this type of overly simplistic, superficial way of seeing the world is common to neurodivergence. And because there is an inability to understand emotion fundamentally, there would be no other way to make sense of why you're being rejected other than some type of superficial or physical difference that you can see with your eyes. It also seems that he was very interested in women, that he wanted to be wanted by women. And by the way, when it comes to a neurodivergent population, this is all completely normal stuff. It's as basic to working with people who are neurodivergent as air is to breathing. So just looking at his social history, all of this makes complete sense. And then let's fast forward and look at the reports from those who knew him or interacted with him once he got to Washington. Every report about his behavior indicates that he was odd, he was unusual. We also know that his father couldn't understand, why do you need to go out to Washington on the other side of the country in order to go to school? Why not apply somewhere closer? Now, I don't know what other schools he may or may not have applied to, but it would make sense because in Brian Kohburger's mind, he would have wanted to be far away from the person that he saw himself as being in the eyes of everybody else that knew him. That he saw himself as being at home, that he could reinvent himself as this successful academic, leaving behind all of the old associations of being rejected by women, feeling like a social outcast, his heroin use, all of that. And of course, you can run, but you can't hide from yourself.
Fact.
And by all reports, when he first got out to Washington, he was given a chance socially. He would go to a party and he had acquaintances, but it didn't take long for people to notice that something was a little different about him. That he looked, quote, normal, that he would go up to an attractive woman in a bathing suit and get her phone number, but then would never call. And that also makes sense, because for him it wasn't really about connecting or getting the girl, it was about getting the number. See, I can get the number. And then there would have been, because he was so smart, the ability to rationalize why he wouldn't make the call, but in actuality, that fear of rejection and knowing that he doesn't connect would have likely kept him from making the call.
Yeah.
It's one thing to choose to be alone, to choose not to hang out with your friends, to feel down and not want to be around people. It's another thing to only have 6 contacts in your phone.
Anything nature I love. I find healing. I love taking care of people. It's just what we do as nurses. I work at United.
To only have 6 contacts in your phone.
But what about other contacts, Heather? What about other text chains, other communications? Did this guy have any community of his own?
He had 18 personal contacts. 18. So think about all the people you meet and the hundreds of random numbers, and they were even identified as girl I ran with, second girl I ran with, a contact and in parentheses, hair.
And this makes sense for 2 reasons. Number 1, there are often memory impairments with folks who struggle with having a range of emotion, because whether you or I realize it, emotion is largely how we recall things. It has a huge influence over what we remember and what we don't remember. So these were ways to try to at least remember. They're prompts for him to remember who these people were, because a name would have been completely meaningless. So instead of putting their name, he's putting how he knows them so that he can remember who they are in his phone.
But then there was mother and father and his sister and just a few others. 18.
And he's, he's in his 30s. Like this, that's unbelievable. In this day and age, it is not unusual for people to have well over 1,000 contacts.
If you are a neurotypical person, that is common.
I don't even have that
But if
many
you are
people.
not, then it isn't common. Because despite an effort to be a part of the social world, the constant rejection from trying and failing, not to mention the great difficulty that it brings into someone's life to try to maintain social relationships when you have no map for what it means to be in connection to another person, is very difficult to sustain. Just the constant feeling of rejection and just not understanding relationships, not understanding how to interface in a way that feels connected to others, and how to communicate effectively with others without being misinterpreted, while also being very overly concerned with how one is being perceived, can be an incredibly frustrating, challenging, and difficult experience for neurodivergent people. Now I want to...
And I'm gonna pause this for a second. And some people need to understand that some people, don't. Some people don't connect with people, well as others and things of that nature. Now, to y'all, that may be weird, but to that person, that's just the way they are. And it is what it is. Uh-oh. Hold on. Come on. Come back. I hate when this phone goes black on me.
Also caution you to be mindful of what the media is portraying with Brian Kohburger. Because as humans, we like understanding. And when we don't understand something, we run the risk of making shit up. Trying to understand based on our lack of knowledge about this subject. And that is what I would argue the vast majority of our media is doing right now.
They
If you're
are.
here in the area and are looking for a solution to cool your home, then this is hands down the system you need to be looking at. It's a heat pump system, so not only will it cool your home perfectly during the summer, but it will also replace your furnace when the winter hits. And believe it or not, it's actually about 4 times more efficient than a typical gas furnace. They're also super quiet, and most homes will qualify for rebates. But the best part, right now, we can get you this exact system for $0 down and 0% interest financing. Click on the Learn More below, and we'll text you over a little more information if you're interested in any way. Again, this is a system that cools and heats your home. It's super efficient, and we can get you started with no money down and 0% interest. Click below for more details.
If you live in a South Carolina zip code and have 0 DUIs in the last 5 years, listen carefully. I was an insurance agent for 30 years, and what I'm about to tell you could save you up to 40% on your auto insurance. Here's what the industry doesn't want you to know. South Carolina drivers pay the most for car insurance out of any state in the country. As we all know from the recent 2025 leak, insurance companies are now in trouble for overcharging South Carolina drivers by as much as 40% for the same coverage. We call drivers in this state gold tier clients. The ones we
Is doing right now.
He called his mother within 2 hours of the murders. He called his mother as he returned to the scene of the crime, not even 2 hours later. He called her 2 more times and all told spent 3 hours on the phone with her. Was this out of character? Was this a binge of calls to mom that you were able to identify on his telephone?
This was his normal behavior. Reaching out to mother and father repeatedly. If one didn't respond, he would reach out to the other. He would constantly text them and call them starting as early as 5 or 6 in the morning, his time. And his parents were Eastern. And then also at night to almost talk him into going to sleep and being able to rest.
Okay, guys, this conversation is tough for me to take. And there's so much in here that I'm going to try to take it in pieces. First, it is very common for people on the spectrum with this psychological profile to turn to their parents for help and support, and for the parents to be overly involved to the point of what we might even call enabling. There is a desire to want to make their child suffer less, just like the rest of us. And because their child is often ostracized from the social world by choice or not by choice because their behavior is bizarre and unusual, parents will get into the habit of being everything to their child. Now, she also brings up sleep issues. Well, sleep issues are as common to this diagnostic picture as air is to you breathing every day. So, using your parents to help you calm down, to help you to feel better, to help you stop, pause, feel safe, whatever the case may be, extraordinarily common. I'll also tell you that the model of psychotherapy that most people are used to, where you get 12 weeks of therapy from your insurance company, does not fit for this population because, number one, it takes them a much longer time to trust you, to feel safe with you. And I'm talking about, in some cases, freaking years. I'm not exaggerating. And then once there is a sense of safety, once they believe in you, trust you, you become a part of their lives, it's not uncommon for one of the central goals of the work to be no longer being as dependent on their parents. Is to help them to translate that dependency first to you and then to
Okay.
themselves, to help them to learn to trust their decision making and to learn how to self-soothe, how to calm themselves down, how to do things independently.
Father, why is mother not answering the phone? Why is she not picking up, Father? He called his parents formally by the names father and mother when speaking to them. Did you see that consistent throughout his text messages to his parents?
Yes, I did. It's eerie. It stands out from any other case that I've worked in that, just the terminology, the phrasing that he used there. I said exactly what you said in the intro. It's Bates Motel. It is this feeling of that movie and mother, and it's just super eerie.
Okay, guys, so this is just incredible ignorance. And I'm not saying that to judge these folks. Why would they know? But this kind of language, this kind of communication style, this over-leaning on parents, being overly formal, this is not uncommon to neurodivergence. And again, because you don't realize it, I don't realize it, but as we grow up, we're picking up like sponges all of the way that people around us are engaging with the world, the language they use, the way people talk to each other. From the time we are very little, that is what we are doing. But if you have a brain that is wired differently, you're doing it in a different way. And that's what we have here. And then we have these folks using their personal references, for example, with the Bates Motel, and then using that in this context to try to make sense of Brian Kohburger's behavior. But I promise you that the two things are completely separate. And there's all kinds of ways that we can interpret that behavior. If it's a female-male scenario, it might be something that we feel is creepy because it's weird, it's unusual, it's not what we are used to. In 99.9% of cases, there's absolutely nothing intentional or violent or dangerous about this behavior. And if you look at the lifeline, the lifelong trajectory of Brian Kohburger, up until these murders, that was true for him too. But it seems to me, and we'll get to this in a bit, he may have hit some type of breaking point.
I always thought just being ready is the point.
He may have hit some type of breaking point. It is very easy for the media to conflate a lack of emotion for a lack of empathy. But they are very different. They do not mean the same thing. Sociopaths or psychopaths or antisocial personality disorder manifest in such a way where I have emotions, but my emotion, my motivation, my excitement, my enthusiasm is somehow wrapped up in violent behavior. And not being able to feel bad for another person is very distinctly different from not feeling emotion across the board.
New York Times obtaining chilling posts, it says, are from the Idaho murder suspect, Brian Kohburger, as a teenager. Times sharing screen grabs of the post with Outfront, in which Kohburger reportedly says he feels no emotion, little remorse. One says, quote, "As I hug my family, I look into their faces. I see nothing. It is like I am looking at a video game."
So here, this news anchor is totally conflating a lack of range of emotion with not having empathy, and they are not identical in the way she's presenting them, and that is really important to understand if you want to understand Brian Kohburger. Brian Kohburger was not
Mhm.
born or very early on in life displaying the type of violent behaviors that you are going to see with a Ted Bundy. He wasn't taking cats from around the neighborhood and putting them in the microwave by any report from anywhere. This violence for him grew out of an intellectual interest and a growing frustration with his circumstances, as well as a deep-seated desire to want to know what is wrong with me. I'm not saying what was wrong with Brian Kohburger. I am suggesting that's what he was saying, and started to over-identify with the symptom of not having empathy, thinking maybe I'm a sociopath too. So the solution to Brian Kohburger in his own mind became being a sociopath, going and committing violence. Maybe that's the way I'll find feelings. That's the way I'll feel better. In fact, one thing that I have found to be 100% true over the years, people that are attracted to psychology, generally speaking, are attracted to it not only because it's intellectually interesting, but because they want to fix some aspect of themselves or their family, or at the very least understand some aspect of themselves or others that they care about. It's not a coincidence that Brian Kohburger chose a forensic psychology interest, and that is indeed what it was that he chose this field for. He wanted to understand the criminal mind, and my guess is because he did not have a full range of emotion, that it was curious to him whether the anger that he was experiencing in combination with the affect dysregulation meant that he too was a sociopath. And this was the way he was going to figure it out. And it would have to be some type of real personal interest for a Brian Kohburger to be so fixated that he was able to overcome overeating or compulsive eating, a heroin addiction, and then completely change his life, going from a large overweight person to someone who is in incredible physical shape and health so quickly. You can see that even when someone is attacking health in that way, it has a compulsive element to it. It has some kind of urgency or pressure behind it, drive. And it's exactly that same type of drive that he clearly over-invested himself in when he pursued school and academics. So it was just another manifestation of that same kind of compulsive desire and effort and attention, just in this case, aimed, targeted, directed towards education. And that is indeed what those that worked closely with him in his undergraduate or master's programs, that is what they felt. They felt that he was a rigorous, enthusiastic student. In fact, one of his professors or teachers or mentors who he wanted to be like wrote him a glowing recommendation into the Washington State program because she felt his pre-dissertation or thesis paper was so high quality. Right after the fact, apparently, she reflected upon that and felt differently about it. But that's my point. The reason why everyone's looking back and reassessing his interactions with them, his behavior, is because of the violent incidents.
When you donate plasma at BioLife, you get paid for the time you spend helping people. You're also giving someone the chance to live better. BioLife helps you get extra money for making a real difference. Make an appointment today.
Alexa, play that everywhere.
Okay.
Alexa, what happened around the house today?
The kids took Ringo for a walk. Your package was delivered. And the raccoons got in the trash again.
Incidents. But
Damn,
the
head
violence
hurt.
is the anomaly when we look at the profile of Brian Kohburger. And it's almost a straight line from all of the experiences that he had in childhood through adolescence and then into young adulthood, where we can see exactly what he was thinking, what he was feeling, how he was behaving. And we already can see from his behavior collectively that he doesn't understand boundaries. He doesn't know boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And it's easy to misinterpret that and say, oh, that's psychotic, or oh, that's someone with sociopathy. But I don't think that's what this is. I think he really didn't register boundaries because he doesn't register them. He doesn't have the capability to register them. So we already know that he's comfortable with extreme behavior because he doesn't experience it as extreme in the way that someone with a normal emotional range would.
Reports from the Idaho State Police obtained by People magazine show 2 women suspected Brian Kohburger was stalking them at Washington State University right before the murders at 1122 King Road in Moscow. Kohburger was a PhD candidate in that criminology department at that school. And the women said he would make daily visits to see them at work. And then he'd make unexpected, uninvited, and highly unwelcome visits to their homes. One of the women was an employee at the university bookstore. She said Brian Kohburger seemed to have researched her, knowing personal details that she'd never shared, including her name and the hours that she'd worked.
And if I don't have any sense of emotion, if I don't understand emotion, I also don't register it in others. So I don't pick up on the social cue that, oh geez, I'm really making this woman uncomfortable, or oh, I'm invading her personal space, or oh, I'm coming off in an aggressive way, or oh, I'm over talking about myself and I'm not asking her about her. You do that because you don't register that you're supposed to ask her about her, or you have no actual interest or curiosity about other people, which isn't, it's not a psychological issue, that's a physiological issue. Something is distinctly different inside of him than in others. And one of the criteria for antisocial personality for a Ted Bundy is their charm, is their ability to manipulate others because they do have an advanced understanding of emotion, so much so that they're able to manipulate it in other people. We do not see that here. Not in the slightest. But boy, do we see anger. An enormous amount of anger. So for those who are able to mask their symptoms well and ultimately blend in with the normal folks, they struggle in a different way. Because while they do not have the same degree of emotion complexity or range as a neurotypical person, what they do experience is generally negative and aroused. And not aroused in a sexual good way, but in an anxious, overly activated state. They don't have the words often to describe how they're feeling, but on the other end of it, as the person interacting with them, you're going to see frustration, irritability, agitation, anger, aggression. You're going to see that. You're going to experience that. And that is exactly what his family and friends describe, particularly as he was moving away from heroin. And that would make perfect sense. Because in the space, in the time, right after somebody has put down drugs like heroin, opioids, their endorphin system, their feel-good system is maxed out. It's been exhausted. And though science likes to argue with the notion of post-acute withdrawal, ask any person who has ever had an opioid or benzodiazepine addiction how they felt 6 months out. Because unless you go through a very rigorous recovery process to learn how to engage the world differently, not just stay sober, but engage the world differently, you are going to be very frustrated a lot of the time. And whether it's having to sit at a red light for too long, longer than you think you should have to, or dealing with relationships or parents or whatever the case may be, you keep coming at life like that, and let me tell you, you're going to bang your head against the wall all the time. And for somebody who's neurodivergent, they have very little flexibility psychologically.
Hi, Heather.
How are you?
Well, Heather found out my Widowmaker was 97% stopped up. If it wasn't for my guardian angel, I wouldn't be here.
Family court gets into your business. If you have a contested case, especially a contested case regarding children, there's going to be a lot of personal info that is going to have to be shared. Discovery is the process of gathering information. The other side can ask for information about you.
Right.
We can ask for information about
women, my bad.
Psychologically. Everything is black or white. It's good or bad. It's this or that.
Right.
They cannot tolerate well ambiguity, uncertainty, abstraction, shades of gray. And this is also evidence of rigidity, inflexibility. And this will often also manifest in what looks to us to be OCD-like behaviors. For example, everything has to be organized or very neat and tidy. My environment has to look a certain way, or I may have to wash my hands at a certain frequency or at certain times, like after I touch my cell phone or walk outside or pick up something. I might have fears of germs or of getting sick. It's all about feeling in control and warding off any possible uncertainties that could come and make you feel uncomfortable. Is the desire to want to control everything. That's what rigidity means. It means that I need to feel like I am in control, and any time there's any disruption to that, it sets off a 4-alarm fire. Flexibility means that on the fly, I can kind of roll with whatever life brings me and make an adjustment. Now, there is a third category, and that's called chaos. Chaos is total disorganization. Chaos, an example of chaos would be total psychosis, where somebody is schizophrenic and doesn't know what day it is, doesn't know what time it is hearing voices or is seeing things that aren't there. In its most extreme form, chaos is exactly that. There's no organization in somebody's thinking. So when we look at the photos of Brian Kohburger's apartment, and you wonder, why is it so neat? Why is there only so much stuff in it? There's like nothing in this apartment. It's because there's a saying in psychology, my outside environment will ultimately affect my inside experience. So if things are nice and neat in the outside world, it'll help me to feel nice and neat in my inside world.
Lord have mercy.
But you'll notice that even with that effort, there's going to be disorganization. And
Mm. Well, I pretty much did 80% of it. Um, like, share, subscribe. See y'all later. Peace.